big pleasure and honor for me to present my work, my thesis on digital innovation in a public service ecosystem. The title of the work has two parts. The first one is how I would speak about my work in the professional life with my clients, with the people at my company. The second part is more about the theoretical framework and the lens I use to analyze the topic. And we will be going through both of them in more details during the presentations. But first, I would like to start with the topic of why I think this is an important topic to do research on. And it's actually all related to the contextual changes in business and in the public administration of today. How internal and external digitalization is changing the context for those who work in the ecosystem. So it's really about the situation of the practitioners in the ecosystem that raised my interest and made this a topic for my thesis. It's much about how the situation is changing from what used to be a plan, prepare and build situation to something where you need to respond to changes in your environment much more quickly. And these are some of the quotes that I face when I speak with people in the practitioner field. So there is a feeling that the current system, current model for development is not working very well, and they raise the question if there would be alternatives. And the alternatives are what interests me. And if we think about the existing literature, what is already said about the alternatives, we have the context or the domain-specific literature, which has evolved from e-government literature to digital government literature, with a significant change from a focus on individual problems, individual solutions, which have been called e-government, to a more holistic, transformative change of how you use technology in reforming and modernizing administration. So there is a switch of focus in the domain-specific literature. When looking at technology and information system literature in particular, you see that there is a really interest in how infrastructure, digital infrastructure, provides new opportunities compared to individual application, individual solutions. And what caught my interest was really the concept of generativity, how it enables distributed, uncoordinated change. However, the fact that you have some digital infrastructure doesn't cause the change in itself. It needs to be enacted. It needs to have somebody who make use of the opportunities. And that's where I found that there is not very comprehensive research. So I started to look for answers to how it could be enacted from the innovation literature. And the reason why is that the really most quoted author on generativity, Jonathan Zittrain, he claims that the participation is the input to generativity and innovation is the outcome. So there is a claim that this should generate innovation in the ecosystem, but it's not very well described how the affordance or the potential is enacted in the ecosystem. So I'm really interested in this understanding the enactment, and that's the second part of the title of the research. So during my presentation, I will pretty much follow the same structure as the dissertation document, which is available to browse after the presentation if you like. Going through some glimpse into key articles, key scholars I build on, explaining to some extent, some detail, as much as I'm able in this short time, the key concepts and how they are used in the theoretical framing. I will explain the research design. I hope we can have a more discussion on that after the presentation, but including the data collection analysis, how I did it in two different levels of analysis. And of course, we are interested in the findings and contributions, and that is pretty much what we will have time in this short 20 minutes presentation. So this would require much more time, but just a few words on each of these three main literature domains that I draw on. information system literature, you find really interesting contributions explaining the characteristics of digital compared to non-digital, how it's editable, how it's no marginal cost of duplication, many characteristics. And that's interesting in itself, but that's not yet what I want to use. But then there are some authors who combine these, like Tilson et al., to the potential that is given by the infrastructure, which is all these individual digital artifacts together. And that Tilson already refers to generativity, but really Zittrain is the key thoughts on generativity, and that's the foundation where I take my research to look at the enactment, because Zittrain and Tilson and most who speak about generativity take quite a structural approach to it, not so much the enactment of how it can be utilized. So I told you that I looked into the research on innovation and trying to find answers for the enactment, how it would be done. No, I didn't find the answer for the enactment, but I did find very interesting aspects which points to the same direction that generativity actually could produce innovation. Like open innovation by Chesbrough, von Hippel about customer innovation. There is, of course, the disruptive innovation by Christensen, and service innovation, Luis Nambisan, and some other innovation pieces, which are interesting in respect to this problem, but they really don't provide the answer for the enactment. The last one is interesting. Last year, by Nambisan et al., there was a really thinking out of the box or proposing new theorizing logics for innovation, and claiming that digital innovation should not rely on the key tenets of innovation management research that most innovation has been on. That was published when I was already quite long in my own research, but I've discussed against those 4 theorizing logics of Nambisan et al. In the discussion part. Yes, relational affordance and temporal human agencies, that's the 2 key theories that I'm using, but I will actually explain those with the next slide, which is, in my opinion, the most important slide to understand the research I've done and how it fits into my view of ecosystems. So basically, starting with how I see the ecosystem as 2 parts, structures and actions. We have structures, socio-technical structure, including the digital structures, which I mentioned that they provide new affordances, new potential. And we have actors who act in the ecosystem. And as we speak of ecosystem, they are distributed. They are not connected. They are not managed by the same organization. And that's an important part when speaking about this topic. So what is claimed in existing literature, that the generativity is enabled by the structures, and it would cause innovation, generate innovation. And the definition of generativity is pretty important in this sense that they are uncoordinated, broad and varied. They are not aligned in the same way of thinking, as you can imagine from innovation, that we have variance in the system. That's a good thing. Affordances, there are quite a few who have used affordances to study the impact of ICT in organizations or organizational change. I think it's a very valid lens for looking at this phenomenon, as well as it states that it's a possibility for goal-oriented actors, but it's relational. It's not the same opportunity for all of the actors. It depends on the actual actor. And what then actually will do the change in the system, what will cause the innovation, is the agency. And I use temporal human agency by Emir Mayamish. And the key claim is that this agency will either transform or reproduce, which means keep the same, basically, in the system. In the research, I'm very much foreground in the actors, not the structural aspects, not the characteristics, not the digital components in the system, but the actors. I look at the actors, what they think, what they do, what they feel about the constraints, what they would need, and use this lens to analyze the interplay between structures and actors, i.e. the enactment of the generative affordance. Due to this framing, I have two research questions on different levels. One on the individual level, trying to understand how the actors, those distributed actors in the ecosystem, how they see the opportunities, how they act based on their perceptions, how they see constraints in the systems, which means that they wouldn't be able to act even though they would like or see value in acting. And then the ecosystem level, which is basically the real ultimate interest, understanding what makes a successful ecosystem in this aspect. A few words on the design. It's a phenomenon which is very contextual, very many things impact this, and the choice to analyze it has been to conduct a qualitative case study. I look at the problem with a worldview or personal view of critical realism, meaning that I believe there is something even if we wouldn't be able to see it. There is a real world. It's maybe not enacted, and it's definitely not always empirically observable, but it's still there. There are tendencies in the system which we are interested in. However, as I foreground the actors in the research, I do it quite much with interpretative methods, meaning that using those methods to understand actions by humans. Very much interviews and making sense of what is happening through the actors, foregrounding the actors. A final aspect of the research design, it's what we have been pretty much interested in this EDBA program, the Engaged Management Scholarship. Having the research well-grounded in the case, well-grounded in the practical world, and using discussions with practitioners in every step of the research progress. Continuing still on the research design, the case study has been the public sector, public service ecosystem in Finland. And what is really important there, of course, there are argumentation why Finland is chosen as a field study because of the maturity, but also because the slowdown of progress in digital government. We have been quite advanced, but there is a kind of the curve is flattening, and there is a concern that we need to do something differently. There is also one reason which made it a very interesting field was the ambitions of the government program of 2015, which lifted digital government and using digitalization for more holistic purposes, which actually resonated very well with the thinking of this research. But really what I would like to emphasize is the choice of ecosystem scoping for the research, because of the concept of generativity, which is very much relying on distributed actors, broad and variant actors in the system, because that's what provides the potential. Well, yes, purposeful sampling as recommended for this kind of quite explorative analysis of a new phenomenon. And at the right you see the informants that have been interviewed for the research, 21 in total, but we tried to get a balanced set with some few different actor groups, which all would be relevant in understanding this phenomenon. Analysis as the research questions are on two levels. Also, the analysis has been on two levels. The individual level analysis based on pretty much the theoretical framing and the research questions with provisional coding and analyzing through that lens. While the ecosystem level analysis is more inductive and emergent by nature. We're going to have a look at the findings in a while. But this is important. Throughout the study, we are interested in the interplay between actors and structures, and that is reflected in the design and in the methods of analysis. So the first round of analysis, the individual level of analysis, is supposed to respond to the first research questions. How actors perceive and act upon the opportunities in the ecosystem. And let's start with the first one, perceiving. How they perceive in the ecosystem. And the first conclusion is that they perceive it very differently, and that's one of the outcomes of the analysis, that every actor has an agentic orientation which is unique to his or her background, what they have been through, situation, what challenges they have, and goals for the future. So they look at the situation, and this is of course in line with the notion of affordance as a relational concept. It's not the same opportunity for every actor, but it's built on their how they look at the past, present, and future. About the question about how the perceptions differ between actor groups, without any pre-assumption, two categories emerged of the analysis, which have been named the policymakers and the implementers, which have a different profile in the agentic orientations. We have the implementers who are more concerned about the current state orientation, which we see actually here to the right. They are weak in the past orientation, they are weak in the future orientation, but they are very, very much interested in the governance and constraints in the present. So those are the people at the distributed government and also the people from non-government companies who work with digital government. On the contrary, the policymakers, which are the central government and international policy actors, they are very much concerned about the future opportunities. They are concerned about how things should change in order to be able to draw the value out of digitalization in the ecosystem. They are concerned about the success of the ecosystem. So this is a finding that looking across the actors, we find two emerging groups of actors. Then looking even more across, forgetting the groups, forgetting the actor categories, what similarities and differences do we find in the analysis? And there are quite a few, both differences and similarities or alignment which are described, but unfortunately we don't have time to go through each and every one of them. However, it's interesting to see how the temporal orientations might explain the differences. The second aspect of the findings, the ecosystem level findings. I used the Gioia model for data structure, analyzing very much inductively, putting all my empirical data on the table, looking for conceptual findings, groupings, and proceeding from first order concept to second order themes and aggregate the dimensions. And found it very useful in order to analyze against this research question. Yes. Okay, so what we see is the research question, individual responses constrained, yes. This is a contextual situation, maturity aspect, which has provided opportunities. This is a cultural kind of legitimacy aspect, which has a real impact on the ability to enact the generative affordance. And this is the governance model which emerged out of the analysis, which really says that you cannot have one governance model in the ecosystem, but you need to separate the fundamental elements from the actual iterative development. How these findings contribute to literature on the topic? Three ways, three things that contribute to the generativity literature. First, there are contributions. We can come back to this contribution part in the discussion. A smaller but interesting thing is going back to the definition of generativity and how it actually is not, the findings are not fully in line with how Zittrain proposed that generativity should be defined. Also, we have some contributions directly to the digital government literature. And coming back to the first slide, why this would be an important topic to research on. Practitioners, people working in the administration, people who try to find ways to use digitalization, they think that something new should be available instead of the traditional design, build, operate model. And this research actually shows a few guidances or propositions that should be considered. For instance, let's pick just a couple of them. I'm pretty sure most practitioners don't know anything about the research by Zittrain and the 5 factors that will influence generativity. Promoting these 5 factors of generativity in the ecosystem would already make a big step in the understanding of how you could do things differently. One more, maybe the first one is really worth emphasizing because most ecosystems, they are focused on establishing a shared vision, alignment in the ecosystem. But actually, when we speak about the ambition to promote the innovation, it's important to recognize that the variance in the system is a good thing, not something you should suppress. In conclusion, even though I'm very happy with the outcome of the research, I think there is very many interesting findings. There are some limitations to take into account when applying the research. There was 21 interviews in the research supported with secondary material. It showed that when you did more and more interviews in the end, there wasn't really much new conceptual coming in, even though the examples given by the individuals were different. But you had already heard the stuff about the dual mode governance, the contextual things, and what was in the ecosystem level analysis. So, but still, I think maybe there could be opportunities to build and even take different actor groups into the picture in order to expand. Now we had a theoretical purposeful sampling with very specific criteria. So we cannot say that the full ecosystem, everybody in the ecosystem would think alike. And also, as it's a qualitative, very specific case environment, we should be very careful about generalizing the findings to other contexts, but follow-up research could replicate the research, maybe find other methods to validate the model, especially the dual mode governance, which I think is really key to most of the ecosystems who are considering how to use it in a different way. And with that, I open up for questions and discussion. Thank you for my time.
Well, I'll start with the compliments, of course. it's clearly overall it's a very rich, very ambitious thesis, and there's also a very strong effort to build some kind of overarching framework to join all the bits together and also to steer and synthesize throughout the thesis, so systematically presented and so it's impressively built and obviously with lots of evidence of thorough research in terms of what you carried out, but also in terms in the field, but also in terms of your own professional knowledge, your priorities, as well as drawing on theoretical concepts from the literature. So there's a very good balance there, with equal efforts in all those directions. So there's a strong DBA thesis in that respect.
So I know that this case study is not about generalization, and you mentioned that again, but I was still interested about what could be the results. So that was done in Finland. Do you think that there would be a huge difference in other countries? If we take the example of France,
yes.
Do you think that policymakers in France will be also oriented toward the future? If not, why?
Yeah, I think yes. Starting from your last question, I think yes, policymakers in France would be oriented to the future based on the fact that I also included some international policy advisors and researchers in the research from the European Union, from the OECD, and some international really well-informed people, and they also were oriented towards the future. So I think that yes, in that sense we would find similar results. Then on the other hand, how valid it would be in other countries, I think it relates to actually the dual mode governance and not the dual mode governance so much, but actually this data structure and the first line of the data structure, the contextual situation and maturity in that specific market. Building on how they see a changing role of administration, how they see that there is a possibility for alternative approaches, and that I think you probably would find similar results in markets who are mature in digital government, whereas some others you are not maybe there yet.
Yes. So basically, in countries where they are not mature, you think that many of the actors will be turned toward the past. They will have.
Yes, or they wouldn't even really see the opportunity. As we know that that generativity or the opportunity is a relational affordance, they would not see the affordance. They would not see it if they don't have the maturity in the market and the past gone through the steps.
And that will be my last question. Sorry. You talk about the 5 critical success. You don't use the term critical success factors, but you talk about these 5 factors.
Yes.
I was wondering if these factors leverage adaptability, mastering, accessibility, transferability. Do you think that they are really specific to change management in public administration?
No.
Or can we observe also these factors in maybe the private sector, in large companies? And I wonder also how change management or the lessons from the change management literature from the non-public sector. I mean, are there really big differences in terms of change management? And so maybe these 5 factors can be applied to the private sector, and also research from the private sector could be also applied. So yes.
Yes. Definitely the 5 factors, which are actually not my contribution but Citroën, and he used the term factor, not success factor, and I stick to that, and they are very much valid in the private sector as well, and he doesn't even make a difference. It's me who apply it in the public sector, and I think they will be valid in the private sector as well. However, the enactment is probably not going to be the same in the private sector because of those reasons and many more. We have a lot of research how public sector differ from the private sector, and I think there is going to be a difference.
question is about public management.
Yes.
You work on public organization. In some pages, I don't exactly remember when, but I think it was in page 60 or something like that. It was my question is about new public management, is about, well, issues. Jesse spoke about difficulties of these organizations. Public organizations and public service is, well, the revolution
Yes.
is huge
Yes.
about these services.
Yes, I'm glad you...
And especially the new public management movement since several decades now.
Yes.
It's a movement when you try to use with a very efficient way
Yes.
the resources.
Which is also
So-
problematic.
Yes. So what's the connection between these issues?
There is a very strong connection. I'm glad you raised it as a topic,
Okay.
because I also do follow some scholars like Dunleavy in the criticism of new public management. Many people think that, or at least in France, in Sweden, in Finland, have been believing strongly in new public management as an efficiency tool. And it also brings decentralization, it brings fragmentation. And now, when we speak about alternative approaches, we need to reintegrate. We cannot fragment and separate and build separate solutions. And that's why the dual mode governance also is very important, separating the coordinated aspect and the iterative experimental thing. So I'm very,
It's almost in contradiction with digital structures.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the title of Dunleavy's article from 2006 is New Public Management is Dead, Long Live the Digital Era Governance. And I really like it. It's a very good article.
Yeah.
It is interesting that during your dissertation journey, you have presented a paper at the European Conference on Information Systems, which is a very good conference, and which suggests that, well, your work is of interest for the information systems community. You've submitted a paper in the European Journal of Information on Information Systems, which is also a Category 1 journal, which is a very good journal, so you are still waiting for the feedback. But I think that all this shows also your willingness to go into research and to do research, I would say, and for that, I think this is well, I can only encourage you to continue that, because research has to learn about your practice and the reflective account that you are able to bring to research with both your professional practice and your willingness to go into research. So I noticed also that, well, well, I think this is the first defense in the cohort 9 that we attend also, so that's a good thing. And well, so I congratulate you for all your achievement and for the dissertation, which is an interesting one. And well, like all research work, well, things can be improved, but you did very well, and I hope you the best for the future achievement, and especially for the papers, which will be, I think, and hopefully as successful as what you've done now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.